across much further. Rainbow, 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 rainbow.
Welcome to the Rene Kassan podcast. Rene Kassan is a Jewish voice for human rights and is named after the Jewish French co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our mission is to promote and protect the universal rights of all people, drawing on Jewish experience and values. Rene Kassan works within the Jewish community by building support for human rights values amongst British Jews, and in the wider community by bringing the authority of the Jewish perspective on issues that resonate with Jewish experience. The last decade has posed enormous challenges to the human rights that establish a humane and just and dignified life for people reaching British shores. However, an inefficient, unjust, and expensive immigration detention system, the criminalisation of refugees for reaching the UK through irregular routes, and the absence of any legal and safe routes for those seeking safety are all aspects of policy that have created an ever more hostile environment for migrants and refugees. So at Rene Kassan, we believe that the British public and the Jewish community have an important stake in maintaining a domestic protection system for refugees and asylum seekers. Throughout history, the ability to seek refuge has been essential to Jewish survival. The horrors of the Holocaust led to the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and the Convention relating to the status of refugees in 1951 in the Refugee Convention. And for this reason, we work to challenge the hostile environment towards refugees by advocating for more humane attitudes, effective policy responses, and adherence to international human rights norms. And our specific objectives include advocating for safe and legal routes to refugees, promoting non-custodial alternatives to immigration detention, establishing a time limit to immigration detention, 28 days, and emphasizing the value of existing domestic and international human rights frameworks. And today I am joined by Amy Williams, who is recently a fellow at the Salzburg Institute of Migration and Mobility at the New School in New York. And for the past 2 years, she's also been the module teacher of undergraduate module Holocaust and Genocide at Nottingham-Trent University. And her new co-authored book with Professor Bill Niven, Memory of the Kindertransport in National and Transnational Memories, Exhibitions, Memorials and Commemorations, has recently been published by Camden House. She's working on her next co-authored book with Bill for Yale University Press for the transnational history of the Kindertransport, due to be published in 2026. And her third book, In Search of the Kindertransport, is a testimony book based on 150 interviews. And in October 2024, Amy began her fellowship at Yad Vashem in Israel, where she found the Kindertransport list. And obviously just started with the Association of Jewish Refugees as well. So welcome, Amy, and thank you so much for joining me today to discuss such an important topic today. So let's just jump straight into the questions. So how did you get interested in working on the Kindertransport specifically?
Well, thanks so much for that introduction and thanks for having me on the podcast. Gosh, this is a really great question. And there's two answers and I'll be as brief as I can, but they are connected. So I grew up with, a lot of World War II stories within my own family. My one grandfather was on a minesweeper, so he was in the Navy but couldn't swim, which I always found quite puzzling. My other grandfather was in Egypt just after the war and has all these incredible stories and this photo album of his time there. And then my other grandma was an evacuee, and she was actually evacuated right near to where the National Holocaust Museum is now, which is great. Such an interesting area of remembrance. And her story sort of, for me, fits into that. And then my other grandma was, she was actually bombed out of her home 3 times. And they moved and she had an aunt, I think, that had some land or a farm or something like that. And the family myth goes, there were these German prisoners of war who worked there, who did the gardening, and they made my grandma a bracelet, and I still have that bracelet.
Wow.
So that's one story, and then the how also really how I came to the Kindertransport more specifically. My dad grew up partly in Switzerland. He was sent there as a child with the Red Cross, and he's got this incredible, quite battered suitcase, which was in the loft with the Red Cross logo on, and inside, as the story goes, in a different story, there were letters. There were childhood letters of please don't send me away, And essentially, he was fine. He was sent to Switzerland in the 60s, right when we won the World Cup, and he had asthma. And this particular area in Switzerland had a long history of caring for children. So my dad was part of this post-war, rehabilitation of children for health reasons. He was fine. But prior to him going, there was this incredible movement, which is known as the Kindertransport. And before the outbreak of the Second World War, Jewish refugee children were rescued to this particular area in Switzerland. And then as the war progressed, um, these routes weren't always accessible. And then after the war, actually the same word Kindertransport is used to refer to non-Jewish children who are going to Switzerland to be rehabilitated from the bombings. And then that sort of developed into children who had survived the concentration camp or death camps. And then after that, it was sort of all these different countries coming together to partner with Switzerland to continue that work of helping children and rehabilitating them. Obviously, not through war or anything like that, but through other means, so asthma and things like that. So that's how I came to the story of the Kindertransport. I was like, it's a Swiss story. I knew all about the Swiss side. I had no idea that we'd rescue people to Britain. It wasn't till I was at university that I came across this incredible history.
That's really interesting because, like you said, I think you mentioned it before, it was just random luck that you found the lists and no one really knew that the lists existed as well, but they've been such an influential way of linking to so many people's histories and families of what happened. So that's incredible to hear. So just on to the next question. Can you tell us about your work on the Kindertransport lists and how these records are helping us better understand the experiences of children who came to the UK at the time?
Yeah, as you just said, it was total luck that I came across them in Israel. I was at my office in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem, and I was just looking through a folder that was labeled these sort of Dutch national, Dutch foreign national files, and within them, 500 or so documents in were the Kindertransport list. These were among other lists, particularly those that were called or referred to as the Africa line. So people that were in Holland that were wanting to flee to parts of Africa. And the Kindertransport lists were nestled among all these other documents. So the Kindertransport lists, I cannot stress how historically significant they are because they tell us, first of all, they tell us who is the Kindertransportee, where they left from, what time their train crossed on the Dutch-German border, who the chaperones were. So many of these names are like breathed back into history for the first time. We know who these incredible people were that accompanied these children out of danger into safety. We know how many trains there were, how many children were on them, the addresses of the chaperones, even the addresses of some of the children. So it really gives you a real picture of who is on the Kindertransport, what a Kindertransport is, and when they left, and their sort of routes as well. But beyond the sort of historical significance, oh my gosh, the emotional one, what it means for those families, the survivors themselves, particularly their descendants, to know, potentially who was the other children that they actually sat next to on the train, but also who were the other families who made that incredible sacrifice to hand their children over to complete strangers in a country that they may have never visited and may have never known the language. That there is such a social aspect of that to sort of reconnect the actual Kindertransports themselves, like survivors for the very first time, can know who else they shared this experience with. I mean, they know that we're on a Kindertransport. Um, but even the minute details of, well, what was your Kindertransport number? What was the number that essentially meant life and rescued you? This is the first time that many of them are knowing that information. So it's got a real, yeah, impact all around.
Yeah, I can imagine because well, a lot of the children coming over were so young, so they probably didn't. I remember like listening to quite a few colleagues that I've worked with, their parents' testimonies, and you
Mm.
can hear that, they remember the happy bits of getting sweets in the Netherlands or something like that. So the happy memories of it rather than,
Mm.
the more technicalities of how
Mhm.
the transport actually works. But just quickly before I move on to the next question, I kind of just wanted to ask you, how did you know where? Because obviously the lists are very, they capture the records very well. But
Mm.
how did you know what numbers in the lists related to what, and how did you know where to look really?
Yeah, so it's helpful in the sense of when you see these records in Yad Vashem, they start with a letter. And this letter gives you some sort of indication as to how these refugees or refugee organizations were uh, collaborating with one another to sort of organize, the as you said, the technicalities around the Kindertransport. And they clearly state the word Kindertransport. So that was obviously a real help. Um, so you see this begin with a letter, and you can see the cooperation between the refugee groups. And they use the term Kindertransport, which is obviously incredibly helpful. So when you get to the lists on the next page, all the children normally, I mean, the lists aren't uniform and they look different depending on what transport you're looking at. But most of the time, they have the children's name, their Kindertransport number, maybe a birth date, maybe an address, their former or last known address. Um, so from the names, you can tell obviously they were on a Kindertransport, but to actually find out more information about them, you have to look to other files. So this might include the World Jewish Relief files, for example. I cannot stress how important they are in this as well, because without them, although I have the list and I can most of the time guarantee that this child left on this particular list, I need the World Jewish Relief files to help me sort of really sediment this, really like confirm it for me. The lists are, affirm that this sort of happened. This was a historical event, but the refugee files that World Jewish Relief have, which are their arrival documents,
Mm.
confirm arrival. They literally confirm somebody arriving in England and then the adaptation process. So you really do have to look to either interviews with the kinder or these other files that help confirm, the information on the list. A lot of the kinder don't, as I said, don't know their Kindertransport number. So you have to go to the World Jewish Relief file to find that information out to then link it back to the list. And obviously, the list there are hundreds of them. The kinder didn't just come to England; they went to many other countries as well. And if you don't know those arrival dates, it's quite hard to find because the lists aren't digitized at the moment. So if I know just that information, literally an arrival date, I can find them really quickly. So yeah, as you said, although archival material, it is incredibly helpful to pinpointing, the kinder's actual journey.
Yeah, it's incredible because obviously, like you said, with World Jewish Relief, at the time they were called something else, I can't remember what it was, but they you can see you've found the lists, and then they take it on and see where they went, how they were doing, and the well-being of everything, which is amazing documentation just to really see whether, the kids were happy as well, whether they were settling in well, which obviously doesn't get done nowadays quite a lot. But yeah, moving on to the next question. So, what are some of the most surprising or moving stories you've come across in your research into the Kindertransport?
Wow. Do you know what? And I can really say this hand on heart. Every day I'm finding something fascinating, moving, totally joyful, but also terribly, terribly upsetting when I look into these lists. So just recently, you know, yesterday I was just, going through the list as you do, and I realized it was the first anniversary that one of the survivors, Hannah Zach Miley, has with her Kindertransport list. I mean, I gave it to her last year in October when I found it. I said, this is your list, and we found all this information about it, but this is actually the first anniversary she actually has, knowing that she traveled with another 51 children. I think there was 52 children on her transport. I think I'd have to check the list, but I think I'm sort of correct with that. It was around the 50 number. And she said, this is a new, this is a first anniversary in a way. This is the first anniversary that she knows who she traveled with, but also it's the first anniversary that she's met people whose family members were on that train. It's the first anniversary that she can remember with people. And I think that's really significant as a milestone in her life. But then only pretty much again yesterday, there was a lot going on yesterday. I had the Winton list in front of me. And I was looking and I was looking at them in comparison to the Winton list that is published online that has the names in alphabetical order. And I found names that aren't on that list.
Wow.
So, this needs further research into, and it's what I'll be doing over the next few days. But I can pretty much confirm that there are well over 50 children so far that I've found who aren't on that online list. And again, I need to confirm this fully. It's something that I'm still researching because I'm still looking at the other list, but I will be able to probably confirm that there are more. And on the Winton list, um, there are some children that have been crossed off.
Oh
So this
wow.
could be for
They
many
didn't make it,
reasons.
or
Exactly. So what I've been able to do with one of the children is I found that she was deported and she was murdered in Terezin or Theresienstadt. And to think that, this was a possibility of her, her name was on the list, she had a number, she was ready to go, but why was her name crossed off? This is again still research that I'm doing. We're still uncovering these stories. And I think that's what's so important and fascinating about the topic.
yeah, do you reckon that's because maybe she got caught with her family at the time, or because maybe they didn't have a sponsor, or I don't, I think you had to have a sponsor to get on the list, but I just wanted
So
to.
yes, it's so complicated. Yes, you do. In some cases, you had to have a sponsor. In other cases, no. Um, it could be the fact that she was ill. She could have been taken off because she was, too poorly to travel. It could be that the parents may have changed their mind. They may have hoped that a family visa was going to come through. It could be for so many reasons, and unfortunately, I can't answer that at the moment. I hope to in the future, but it's that these lists essentially throw up more questions. And just going back to Hannah's story, Hannah was rescued and arrived on the Kindertransport on the 26th of July 1939. And she eventually went to a foster family that was going to look after one of the little girls who was off um, the Winton list that never arrived. So that final train that was meant to depart but didn't because of the outbreak of the war, she was meant to stay with that family, but Hannah sort of took her place, if you will. Um, and I know that every anniversary, Hannah thinks about that child. She was called Erica. And I've not been able to find out her fate. I think I've now tracked down her father's fate, and he didn't survive. And I found a file that had her name listed in connection to obviously her father. And this again is something that I'm desperately trying to find out. There are so many stories that are Kindertransport stories that we still don't know about. So, we have all the names of these children on these lists, and hopefully we can track them. But we also have names of children that were meant to go on the Kindertransport, and we need to find out their fates as well, because you need to see these fates in relation to one another, because they're all kinder. They were, you know, the fact that they were all children, they were all kinder, but they were all meant to be on Kindertransports as well.
And I think it's quite powerful to illustrate, when there are safe ways to evacuate or flee from persecution, then, you do save a lot more people and their fates change course. So I think it's just
Mhm.
such a powerful way of illustrating through a campaigning perspective as well. But just quickly before we move on, I just wanted to ask you whether the Winton lists are similar to the German ones, or, the kids that came from Germany specifically.
Oh, great question. So yes and no. Um, they are similar in their layout, the name, maybe a birth date and a number. The number is where it gets interesting, because sometimes they'll have their check number and sometimes they'll have their Kindertransport number, or even both. So it's interesting that sometimes their Kindertransport number is essentially their home office number, what they were registered under. Um, so this would, all their files would have been checked and double checked and sent to various offices, and you can see that number in the files. But sometimes you'll see their sort of, I suppose, committee number. So that's an interesting take. The Winton children are definitely part of the Kindertransport. Because I know that, aren't they part of this rescue operation? They are, but they're also separate as well.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting to find.
Are they part of the 10,000 number, or is that an extra number?
So this is hopefully what we'll be able to sort of confirm with these lists. I think they would be, because they have so one child is Hannah's number is 8814, and there's a Winton child that also has a number in the 8,000s as well. So I would say yes, they are part of this figure. Um, but I think that we need to go through all of the lists to actually know how many children we rescued, because this figure is out there, but is it that figure? There are some lists where one child is listed twice.
Wow.
So they may have been listed on a May list, but they're also on a July list. And again, this is where the World Jewish Relief records are so important, because you have to check, well, when did she leave? Did they leave on this one or this one? And why are they changed onto another transport? So that's really important. But then with the Winton children, um, we've also found documents that children from Austria joined the Winton transport, and they are rescued as part of that as well. So we have their documents from the Austrian files, which are kept at the National Library in Israel, which is just down the road from Yad Vashem. So there are so many files that speak to one another. So I think we've got a lot of work to do to figure out this 10,000 number, because also there's a document from a report from a British committee that states that they're sort of capping the number at 10,000, and this is before the war, because they cannot home the children. There's not enough places and people that are coming forward. And they say, we'll cap it at around 9,000, and we'll leave 1,000 spaces available in case of emergency or later, anything that comes later. Well, later didn't come later. The Kindertransports to Britain came to an end. So I think we really need to go through these lists in real detail to uncover the number.
No, that's really great to kind of understand in more detail, because obviously like you said, we all know the 10,000 number, but where does that come from specifically? And that nicely takes us on to the next question. So, how do you see the legacy of the Kindertransport shaping the way that the UK thinks about responsibility towards refugees today? I don't know if you've ever thought about this kind
Mm,
of thing, but I mean, the work that we do obviously does impact it quite a lot.
absolutely. And I know that some of your members, their parents were on the Kindertransport. So, there is a direct connection there. I think it really, I can't stress how important this question is. And it's something that I myself need to think about it in a lot more detail. But I think that we can learn from the past. I think that that is an important thing to say. I think what is important going forward is that we always remember our ongoing obligation of safety, that safety doesn't end when your feet are in British soil or on British soil rather. Um, Safety means the adaptation process. It means, feeling comfortable in this new environment. It means health, learning the new language, making friends, all those sorts of things that um, was and wasn't there for the kinder. It really depended on who looked after you and where you were placed. Some people were more, I suppose, caring and willing to take the time than others. Um, I think remembrance is a big one
Mm.
that, we continue to remember our past and learn from it. Um, but also remembrance in that we really listen, and I mean listen to the survivors. Hear their experiences. What did they go through? What did they see? What gave them joy? What gave them sorrow? What hurdles did they have to overcome in Britain? The journey didn't come to an end in Britain. Many children, made further journeys to Scotland, to Wales. They were scattered across the UK. What was it like, living in all these different areas? I think that's important, to understand the local, the national, and the transnational stories, and not look inwards, look outwards. The Kindertransport is a transnational story, and I think for so long we've remembered it as a national one.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to really understand what happened at the time. Some of the Kinder were interned and deported as enemy aliens. We sort of outsourced our responsibility and sent them to Canada and Australia um, as aliens, as people that we thought were potentially spies, and these were innocent refugee children. So I think that is a big point. And then the second one is storytelling, to continue to have these stories out there, that there is a presence, there is a voice, and that these stories communicate with one another. I've had the real privilege of interviewing Kindertransportees with refugees from other conflicts, and I think when you have two refugees or even more in a room and you listen to them and you see the understanding between them, that you'll never know, even if you can ask 10,000 questions, you will never understand because you've not lived that experience. But seeing that, seeing it really is, it's so impactful because it is something that you cannot understand until you've lived it. But seeing how those unspoken words or those movements between people, I think that is something which is important to see. And sadly, as we move to a point where tragically the survivors are not going to be with us, forever, those moments are even more precious now. And I think we need to capture them even more.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's a really nice parallel that you showed there. The fact that, these are shared experiences, that whether it happened in the 1940s
Mhm.
or whether it is happening today, refugees do face similar things, whether it's
Mm.
persecution, the journey, no one wants to leave their home and their families, but sometimes you are forced to because there is no other way, whereas your life is at risk. And I think that understanding of what that feels like, as you said, you would never know unless you're going through that situation. So I think it's so important to really share those stories and those feelings so that maybe it does speak to people in a way that they can shape how we deal with people coming over here and be more welcoming and compassionate because that's ultimately what these people need. And
Mhm.
we're all human. It's all part of a shared experience of just being a humane and nice person to just listen. So simple. It's free. It doesn't cost anything, but it's so powerful when people do that.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the power to listen is the most giving thing that you can do as a human, to listen to another human being.
exactly. Whether you have different opinions or whatever,
Mhm.
it's such an important thing. And one of the key issues today is the lack of safe routes for refugees, as I've mentioned before. So, what lessons do you think we can learn from the Kindertransport when considering how to protect vulnerable people today? I know you've touched on it, but is there anything else that you would add to that?
I think for me, the biggest takeaway with regards to the finding the list was understanding the power of the community behind the list and how they advocated for safe routes for these children. And I really, when I mean advocate, I mean, gosh, that how many meetings they had. The Danzig community, representatives of the Danzig community or Gdansk community came to Britain and really, championed their cause that, you have to help these children. Nobody's looking at them. Please help. We have the case of Winton and the people that he worked with, like Trevor Chadwick and Doreen Warrener, and so many others, particularly those in Czechoslovakia itself, obviously Czech Republic and Slovakia now. Um, it can take an individual that can make a change, but oh my gosh, the power of community. It was so many unknown names, all these women that worked behind the scenes, helping to fill out paperwork, the secretaries who were answering the phones, the people that were sending the letters and the telegrams to organise all this. Um, that is an incredible effort, and that is something to really remember. And that's how Safe Routes got, opened up in the first place because of this, the power of community. And then beyond the Kindertransport list on the other side, you have the other power of community, the welcoming community, and that community that helps on arrival. And that community then hopefully, not just helps on arrival, but beyond that to integrate people, to make them feel welcome, to be a helping hand. Those refugee committees that tried to do their best and to understand what was happening to the children, what their needs were. I mean, some of the files talk about pocket money, that they need a new pair of shoes. Real day-to-day practical help, let alone the emotional help. That the practical help of, well, what do you need to function as a human being in a new place where you don't have the adults around you, you don't have the support of a family. You often these children are very young. Um, so yeah, I think that those are the things in terms of safe routes. I think the biggest thing as well that I can take away from these lists is to act now, act yesterday. These people were um, working around the clock. You can see how much paperwork there is with phone calls and letters. I mean, the refugee organisations were inundated. There are so many letters that say, "Thank you for your letter. We're doing our best. We'll be in touch." And I can't imagine the responsibility and the hurt that those people must have felt every day they walked into the office, every day that they had this responsibility to try and rescue somebody, to get them on a list, on a safe route. I think that we often think about the bravery of the parents, of course, the everything that happened to the kinder themselves. But I think we also need to think about those people that really did try um, and fought to get these children onto safe routes. Um, and I think for the first time, we can really see what a safe route looked like, and the paperwork, the amount of paperwork, my gosh, behind a safe route. It wasn't easy. It was very bureaucratic still. We often hear of, this visa waiver scheme, that's sped up a process. I mean, it did in a way, but my gosh, there were so many applying for it. You see all these sort of application files, and it's heartbreaking. You see the passport photos of the child, their medical records. I mean, there are so many heartfelt letters from parents, even to Princess Elizabeth at the time. We have many of those. Um, so I think, yeah, the the collaboration between refugee groups is incredibly important for safe routes. You need national and international mobilization and collaboration. If that is so clear looking at these lists and all the documents around them. And yeah, for the first time in 60, no, sorry, 86 years, we're able to track what this safe route looked like, the timings around the safe route, that people had to have an awareness. The Dutch needed to know where on the border the train was crossing, the ferries needed to know times and how many children. So I think what it shows you is that the organisation, that safe routes, they mean a lot of work, but the hard work that goes into them is so rewarding. It can be heartbreaking at times, but my gosh, it really can make a difference.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear your take on that. In your view, how has the narrative around the Kindertransport been used? So either is it being used helpfully in the current political debates around immigration and asylum system, or not, do you think? Because obviously the government likes to take credit for the Kindertransport quite a lot, even though they didn't actually do anything, and it was, the organizations that did it. Ultimately, the government needed to give its final permission from the Home Office and things like that. But I think you know where I'm coming from that.
So the positives I'll start with. I think that if we look at somebody like Lord Dobbs and we think about how he applies his own story, his own experiences to talking and advocating for refugees today. And I think going back to an earlier question, this awareness to help other refugees is so clearly felt by refugees. It is so, it's not surprising at all. It is you know, endearing and heartfelt that it is refugees or former refugees that advocate so much for present day refugees, because they know, what it is like. Okay, it's not the same, and they have their own individual experiences, but they know generally what it is like to leave home, to not know a language, those things that they have in common. Um, so I think that how the Kindertransport is being used to speak about the current refugee crisis in a positive way is that we can see survivors advocating for people now. We can see how they use their experiences of Kindertransport, whether that be positive, negative, anything in between, to sort of say, this is what I experienced, and I hope that nobody else has to go through this. And if they are going through this, let's step in and help them. And I think that's great. Um, I think the more, I suppose, critical or uh, drawback of thinking about the Kindertransport in relation to the refugee crisis now is that the Kindertransport is often, I suppose, put on a pedestal, like it is the refugee scheme. This is the one to follow. And it wasn't without its flaws. It had its flaws. It was very bureaucratic still. Um, there are myths around it that I think have built up that people still feed into. It was incredible and so needed, and it's incredible that it happened, but it wasn't without its flaws. And I think using the Kindertransport as an example to advocate for refugees is brilliant. It if it can help that way, wonderful. But I think that we can't ignore the down, the downside of this, in the sense of some of the kinder were abused. They became domestic. They didn't have happy adaptation processes. Some people were moved from pillar to post. They became double refugees when they were evacuees. I know some kinder that wet the bed and their foster family didn't understand why. They didn't understand that they'd just experienced Reich pogrom night. They'd just been up, lived under Nazism for so long. They'd been bullied at school. They'd been ostracized. Their worlds had shrunk. And some people didn't understand that. And of course, how could you if you weren't there? However, they weren't engaging in those conversations with them. Um, so I think that in remembering the Kindertransport and to talk about the refugee crisis, we need to remember the Kindertransport in all its complexity, good and bad, everything in between. Um, and that's hopefully how we can learn to help refugees now that, we do need a dialogue and we do need these stories to be out there. And we need the stories to be, you know, raw and true. We need the whole story. We don't need this sort of rosy outlook. We need a story that presents, the experiences of the refugee, or somebody that is trying to help them. I think you need to see all the complexity around it. Um, and also, the Kindertransport wasn't the only refugee experience in British history. We could think about the Basque children that came a year before the Kinder, who were escaping the Spanish Civil War. We could think of, in terms of numbers, during the First World War, we rescued more Belgian refugees than we did Kinder. Um, so I think, we need to think about the Kindertransport in relation to all our different forms of rescue, and see how the Kindertransport is one of many, and understand how the Kindertransport fits within our own history of rescue. I don't think, I know that there is scholarship out there on this, but I think in a general public sort of sense, people need to understand that we do have a history there, and it's a complex history. It's a history that we should celebrate, but it's also a history that we should reflect on deeply and learn from and understand what we did good and what we can learn from.
And I think the most important thing there you said was, it's one of many, which is exactly what is happening now. We have one of a few different safe routes at the moment, but the whole point is to expand in order to have more safe and legal routes to people to
Mhm.
come here so that they can have safety from persecutions and fleeing from those things. And I think that's such a powerful thing to think about whether whatever, you know, job or thing you have. Um,
Exactly. And even at the time, the Kindertransport happened at parallel to the Euphilia, to the domestic visas, to those who came on through academic routes, those that went to the Kitchener camp. The Kindertransport happened alongside and connected to all these other things, all these other movements of people. Some of the Kinder had relatives or maybe have knew somebody who was at Kitchener camp. They may have tried to go on a youth transport, but then been sent on a Kindertransport. There was an interconnectedness between refugee movements as well. And I think that's important.
yeah. And final question. So if you could influence current refugee policy in the UK based on your historical work, what would you most want policymakers to understand and to act on?
I think this is going to sound quite obvious, but I think that all the work that I've done with the list and with the stories and the paperwork behind the list is to remember that there is a human behind these facts and figures and this paperwork. And I think you alluded to that earlier anyway. But I think that we really need to remember at a government level, at a social level, every level, we need to remember that this is somebody that probably has experienced something horrendous in their homeland, who has made the real brave decision to leave. You know, we are so attached to our surroundings, to make that decision to depart from them and to depart from family. The surroundings are one thing, but living, breathing people that you cherish is another. Um, and make that decision to flee is really difficult. And I think we need to remember the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations that somebody had for their life in their homeland, and how they're faced with a new world and a new reality because of a decision that they were often forced into making or having to make literally to save their life. I think that we need to remember the person and what they are going through. Another thing would be, again, we sort of talked about it in another question, but this a dialogue, talk to refugees, past, present, hopefully not future, about their experiences. You know, talk and talk and talk. I can't say how important it is to talk. Um, if people want to think about the Kindertransport and talk about it in parliamentary debates in relation to present refugee crises, reflect on all of it. Don't pick and choose history. I know you can't discuss the whole history of the Kindertransport in a parliamentary debate, but at least reflect upon its complexity broadly, and think about that. And I think, yeah, as I said, act before it's too late, and continue to remember, continue um, to think about these stories in relation to one another, and build those bridges, build those monuments that connect these stories, because there's always a connection. Um, no matter how small it might be, there's always a connection because people are people. And that's what you see in these files. Every single one, is a unique and individual story, but it's one of many, and that there are definitely shared experiences there. Um, and I think my last thought would be that there are so many files and applications of people whose stories were never told because they never got on a safe route. And I think in talking about safe routes, we also have to talk about all the people that don't get onto them and perish as a result. It's not enough just to remember people who are able to make those journeys, and of course we should remember those, but we should also take time to think about the people that we weren't able to help, whether through many different reasons. But we should also think about um, you know those that we can't help, and even when we can't help them, at least we're remembering them. We're doing something to keep them alive somehow. Um, if
Thank you
that
so
helps.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Amy, for such an insightful conversation on, thinking beyond what the Kindertransport is. Because, I mean, loads of people have heard of it and know what it is, but the complexities of it, I think, is really powerful for what you've mentioned. Um, Great. So thank you so much. And yeah, if you want to take part in our campaigning, then do have a look at our briefings, whether it's on immigration detention or safe routes as well. And I'm just going to link some links to Amy's research as well. So if you do want to find out more about that. So yeah, thank you so much. And join me next time for another episode into our refugee podcast.
Thank you.
Mom, are we there yet? Mom!